Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we peel back the layers of universal human experiences and uncover their surprising complexities. You know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
Especially after, well, the last few challenging years, maybe the pandemic keeping us all at home suddenly, we found ourselves missing things we never ever thought we would.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was the bustling office or that commute you used to dread, or maybe even, I don't know, those colleagues who sometimes got on your nerves.
Right. It's funny how that happens.
There's this peculiar comfort in looking back, isn't there? In reminiscing about what felt like the good old days, even when, consciously we know they weren't always perfect. It's a powerful pull.
It absolutely is. That yearning for a time that feels, well, simpler maybe, or just past. It's a really profound and very human impulse.
Definitely.
And today we're not just dipping our toes in, we're truly diving into this whole phenomenon.
Indeed. And it really begs the question, is this longing for the past just, harmless daydreaming? Is it a helpful coping mechanism? Or is it something maybe far deeper, more complex, perhaps even problematic?
Yes, the big question.
Yeah, and that's the fascinating journey we're embarking on today, exploring the multifaceted phenomenon of romanticizing the past and its very close cousin, nostalgia. And actually, as we were prepping for this deep dive, I was genuinely surprised to learn about its origins. Like, where did this word even come from? Can you tell us a bit about how this seemingly universal feeling first got formally defined?
Well, before we even jump into the origins, maybe let's just set the stage a little for you, the listener.
Good idea.
We've pulled together a really rich tapestry of sources for this. We've got personal reflections, candid stuff from online communities. We've looked at some quite rigorous philosophical dissertations, explored historical analyses, and even drawn on contemporary psychological perspectives.
So a real mix.
It's a deeply interdisciplinary look, yeah, at a feeling that, let's face it, touches pretty much every one of us at some point.
And our mission, for you listening, is to move beyond, just a superficial understanding. We really want to uncover the historical roots, the deep psychological underpinnings, and, importantly, the profound philosophical implications of nostalgia. Especially its surprising, almost inseparable connections to our personal identity. And get this, our very experience of time itself.
That connection to time is key.
Right. The goal here is to provide you with a comprehensive, hopefully thought-provoking understanding of why we are so drawn to the past and what that actually means for our present and, crucially, for our future.
Okay, so where do we start?
Let's jump right into the immediate, sort of visceral experience of nostalgia, something many of us can relate to personally. We found some really interesting discussions online, like on the Our Meditation subreddit, where people were sharing their struggles with this exact thing, romanticizing the past.
Right, that immediate feeling.
Exactly. And one user, Amy First 277, described something really striking. She mentioned feeling nostalgic for times when she knew she was sad, like in the moment, only to realize much later that those were actually good memories she was making.
Wow, that's quite a thought.
It's such a paradox, isn't it? Being sad about the past while maybe simultaneously creating new, future nostalgic memories from that very sadness.
It's an incredible human paradox. Yeah. Imagine being in, I don't know, a difficult period, feeling genuinely low, and then years later, looking back on that same period with this sort of soft, warm glow,
Like rose-tinted glasses.
Exactly. Tinged with a longing for its return, almost like you're remembering it through, a sepia filter or something. That's what Amy First 77 described.
What came out of that discussion was some really practical advice, too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Amy First 77 found this simple quote that just clicked for them. Stop cheating on the present with the past.
Ooh, I like that.
Punchy.
Yeah. And they even took it a step further, printed it out, taped it to their monitor at work during a particularly rough patch. A physical reminder.
Exactly. That physical reminder served as this constant nudge, to refocus on the now, to be present rather than just lost in reverie. It really speaks to the immediate conscious effort it can take to break that cycle.
That's a powerful, very tangible approach. I can see how that would help.
But then we also stumbled upon a more philosophical take from another user, not Moses, in that same thread.
Okay.
They brought up this idea that the imperative of control, our need to control things, is actually one of the many delusions of the consensus trance.
Consensus trance. That's an interesting phrase.
It is, isn't it? What does that even mean for our understanding of romanticizing the past? And what's the core insight here for our listeners? What's the takeaway?
Well, what Not Moses seems to be getting at in a pretty direct way is this fundamental truth about existence. Changes. It's inevitable.
Right. The only constant.
Pretty much. Think about it. No matter how much our minds are conditioned or, habituated to believe we can control circumstances or even time itself, change is going to happen. You can't stop it.
Nope. And their argument goes, insisting upon things remaining as they were, clinging desperately to a fixed past, that's essentially driving your own mind into a locked cell. It's a self-imposed prison.
Okay, so the insight.
The profound insight, the sort of blinkest moment maybe, is that real freedom doesn't come from trying to control the uncontrollable like our past or the flow of time. It comes from a radical acceptance of change.
The acceptance.
Yeah, accepting change is the fundamental nature of things. The locked cell is denying that truth. So the real power lies in turning around, embracing the present as it is, and navigating the river of time rather than trying to build a dam.
Moving from resistance to flow.
Exactly. It's about flow.
So this romanticizing, it might offer a fleeting sense of pleasure or comfort, right? But is it ever truly harmless? Or is there always maybe a hidden cost when we lean on the past too much?
That's a really critical distinction because, yeah, a fleeting sense of comfort might seem benign, harmless.
But the deeper we lean into romanticizing, the more it kind of edges towards pure escapism. And escapism, well, by its very nature, it can stop us from engaging with our present challenges, right? From solving current problems or even truly building a future.
It holds you back.
It can, yeah. It's like a comfy blanket that eventually becomes, a weighted straitjacket. And Not Moses describes their own journey, saying it took decades of insisting upon what is not to get beaten into a state of reasonableness, emphasizing it was no fun and definitely not a path they'd recommend.
So a painful lesson learned.
It seems so. And it highlights this profound discomfort that escapism, even pleasant nostalgia, might just be papering over.
Right. And we also saw mentions in those posts about meditation as a coping mechanism.
We did. And meditation can be incredibly beneficial, obviously.
Sure.
But there was this interesting observation that for some, a really intense degree of dedication to meditation is a means of coping with an unenjoyable personal life.
So it could be another form of avoidance.
It hints at that possibility, yeah. That sometimes our coping strategies, even the ones that seem healthy on the surface, can also be symptoms of deeper unease or a way of avoiding our current reality. They can become, like that quote said, another form of cheating on the present.
It's fascinating how this concept, nostalgia, something we use so casually today, actually has this really specific and frankly quite strange origin story.
Right. It's not what you'd expect.
I always just thought of it as, a natural, timeless human emotion, a universal thing. But it was formally coined by this guy, Johannes Hofer, back in 1688 as a medical disease.
A disease, yeah. It's quite a label.
It really is. And it fundamentally reshapes how we should maybe think about the term.
Absolutely. For Hofer, and for many back then, this supposed disease, nostalgia, initially seemed to be an exclusive prerogative of the Swiss.
Only the Swiss got homesick.
That was the initial thought, yeah. Particularly linked to Swiss mercenaries serving abroad. They observed these soldiers suffering from this intense, almost debilitating longing for home.
What kind of symptoms?
Things like melancholy, loss of appetite, even physical wasting. It was seen as a physiological response to being displaced, to being away from their mountains, I suppose.
Wow.
Now, obviously, this idea was later rejected. Scientific evidence grew, showing nostalgia occurred in other nations, too. It wasn't strictly a Swiss disease.
Okay, good.
But it's crucial to understand that nostalgia as a concept is very much a product of modern medicine and a sort of discursive product of late 17th century Europe. It didn't just pop up naturally as a named emotion. It was specifically defined, categorized, pathologized even, within a particular historical and medical context.
It was an invention, in a way.
An invention, a conceptual tool to understand a cluster of symptoms they were seeing, yeah.
So not just a feeling, but a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Something to be treated.
Exactly.
And it gets even more specific, almost poetic, with Theodor Zwinger later on. In his 1710 amended edition of Hofer's dissertation, he was the first to draw this direct line between nostalgia and the Ros des Vaches.
Ah, yes, the Kurennen.
The Swiss cow-herding melodies. A simple tune causing such profound sorrow. What's really behind that? It sounds almost mythical.
It does sound a bit like folklore, doesn't it? But the explanation lies in a very human phenomenon. Habituation.
Habituation.
Yeah. The music wasn't feared for its musical qualities alone, like the notes themselves were inherently sad or dangerous. Instead, it acted as a powerful memorative sign.
A trigger.
Precisely. Imagine these Swiss mercenaries, far from home, maybe in some flat foreign land, and suddenly they hear these familiar cow-herding tunes.
Hmm.
These were melodies they'd lived with their entire lives, notes that accompanied their daily routines, their work, their leisure, family gatherings.
Part of the fabric of life.
Absolutely. Through this constant, intimate exposure, the music became intrinsically linked to their country, their former pleasure, their youth, and all their joys of life. It wasn't just a song. It was the sonic backdrop of their whole world.
So when they heard it miles away.
It would instantly excite in them a bitter sorrow for the loss of them. The sheer familiarity, the deep embedding of that music in their daily lives made its absence and the absence of the world it represented incredibly painful when triggered.
So it wasn't just the place they missed.
It was the whole world evoked by that familiar sound. It highlights that familiarity and established routine were absolutely central to that intense emotional response. It's like, when you smell cinnamon and you're instantly back in your grandmother's kitchen,
Yeah, totally.
where a certain pop song comes on and bam, you're 16 again at that specific party. The sensory input triggers the deep emotional memory of a world that is now gone.
That makes so much sense. It wasn't the place itself so much as the feeling of being in that place and all the routines and associations tied up with it.
Exactly, the whole habituated context.
And then, as the concept evolved, the philosopher Kant made an explicit contribution that sort of deepened this understanding, shifted it in a crucial way.
Indeed. Kant really temporalized the concept. He shifted the focus of nostalgia away from just the homeland, the physical place,
What?
to the time the experience took place. So the pain became associated with the pastness of the event itself, not merely the geographical spot where it happened.
Oh, so it's not just missing Switzerland, it's missing being young in Switzerland.
Precisely.
Oh.
For Kant, the key distress was that the longed-for past was over. Done. Finished.
Irreversible.
Irreversible. And this temporalization, as the sources call it, fundamentally changed the language of nostalgia. It also had a huge impact on the prospect of a remedy.
Because you can't go back in time.
Exactly. You can't simply return to a time like you might conceivably return to a physical place. The loss becomes about irreversibility, that absolute unchangeable quality of things being definitively in the past.
It transforms it from homesickness into something more existential.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It becomes more of an existential ache for what can never, ever be recaptured.
Which brings us to a deeper philosophical question then. What is this longed-for object in nostalgia? It's clearly not just pure memory, is it?
No, it seems not.
Our sources describe it as being marked by intimate familiarity, right? But also, paradoxically, by its absence. When we feel nostalgic, there's this powerful wish to re-enter, per impossible.
Per impossible meaning through impossibility.
Right. The past of a world that has effectively vanished from our lives and of which we are painfully reminded by its extant traces. It's an impossible return, yet we still yearn for it.
That's a crucial distinction. Casey's analysis, for instance, emphasizes that the world under nostalgia, that idealized past we long for, isn't just a simple summation of these memories. It's more than just adding up recollections.
Okay.
This longed-for world in its unified, coherent form actually requires the help of the imagination.
Imagination comes into it.
Big time. Its productive power alone allows the nostalgic to forge the unitary representation of a previous, continuous, complex entity like that of the homeland or childhood. Think of it less like a photograph, maybe more like a painting.
How so?
Well, the artist, the painter, takes elements of reality, sure, but they arrange them, enhance them, maybe leave bits out to create a desired impression, a feeling.
So it's not just pure memory then. It's like our mind is actively constructing this idealized past. Maybe polishing the rough edges a bit.
Exactly. The longed-for world is a product of nostalgia itself.
Wow.
Which implies that nostalgia could never be inappropriate or unfaithful to its object because it is proper to this very object.
What does that mean, proper to this object?
It means the idealization isn't a mistake or a distortion of the real past. The idealized version is the object nostalgia creates and longs for. If we assume all memory is supposed to be perfectly accurate recall, then yeah, nostalgia looks defective.
Like a faulty recording.
Right. But the philosophical argument here suggests its very nature is to create this idealized, almost mythical object. It's not a flaw in memory. It's a specific feature of nostalgia designed to bring coherence and a certain emotional resonance to our experience of the past.
The imagination working with memory.
Hand in hand, yeah. Conjuring a particular version of what was.
And what's at the core of this constructed, longed-for thing? It sounds like it's deeply tied to loss.
Absolutely. Beyond the specific content, the specific place or time nostalgia seems to focus fundamentally on the quality that all pasts, distant, close, absolute, partake in equally, that of loss.
Just the fact that it's gone.
Pretty much. It's not just what was lost, but the very fact of its being gone, being irrecoverable. Hart's perspective clarifies this more. He talks about an idealized past that brings together the present life project, creating these moments where our temporally strewn out self gathers itself, giving us this profound sense of being truly at home with ourselves.
Like finding coherence.
Exactly. Imagine your life is like scattered puzzle pieces. Nostalgia, with imagination's help, brings them together into a beautiful, coherent picture, making you feel whole just for a moment.
But it's a picture of something that wasn't quite real.
Well, that's the catch. This now determinate past is not something that I can reproduce because it was not there originally. It's a past that needs to be contributed by the imagination, creating an enriched new object, a past that never quite was, but that we feel so intimately, so truly belonged to us. And Jangalevich really zeroes in on this. He says, nostalgia's true object is the past's pastness.
The past's pastness.
Yeah, the simple, brute fact that it is over. He even compares it to love, saying both nostalgia and love produce sacred sites, places, or moments elevated to this special, almost revered status because they are irretrievable.
It's the finality that makes them precious.
Exactly. The very fact that you can't go back.
That's such a poignant way to put it.
Yeah.
The past's pastness. It's not just what happened, but the very fact that it did happen and is now gone forever. And often, what the nostalgic person longs for isn't even some grand, exceptional event, is it? It's something far more subtle.
You're absolutely right. It's often not the extraordinary, the dramatic, the heroic moments. Instead, it's the mundane, the familiar, the daily, the habitual, the stuff that forms the very fabric of everyday life.
The little things.
The little things, yeah. Think of Heinrich Heine's 1844 poem, Nachtgedanken, Night Thoughts. Even though he wasn't Swiss, it captures that sting of exile and homesickness so powerfully.
And what does he focus on?
The urgency isn't about some grand adventure back home. It's tied to the aging figure of the mother, contrasted with this idea of a timeless homeland.
The personal connection.
Right. It's the irreversible passage of time affecting the most personal, foundational relationships and routines. He misses the quiet, consistent presence of his mother, which kind of symbolizes all the small, comforting details of home that have now changed or are gone.
And this sense of irreversibility, that poignant sort of farewell to what was, that's fundamental, isn't it?
It's utterly crucial to understanding nostalgia. The sources talk about the irreducibility of the not yet and the never again. Meaning that every event, once it occurs, once it slips into the past, becomes an adieu pour toujours ou à jamais, a farewell forever, goodbye for all time.
Wow. Heavy.
It is. The past is stable and known precisely because it's fixed in its pastness. It can't be altered. It simply is. The future, on the other hand, is inherently uncertain, fluid, unformed.
Which is why you can't really hope for the past.
Exactly. To hope for the past and to remember the future are oxymoronic belief sets. You can't genuinely hope for what has already been, nor can you truly remember what hasn't happened yet. It's a temporal contradiction.
Okay.
And this introduces this really interesting concept of premultimacy.
Premultimacy, what's that?
It refers to the rarity and uniqueness of every single experience.
Every experience is rare. Can you expand on that? Maybe give an example. How does that philosophical idea connect to the very personal feeling of nostalgia?
Absolutely. Premultimacy isn't just about rarity in a general sense, like a rare stamp or something. It's the profound philosophical recognition that this exact moment, right now, with all its specific nuances, the light, the sounds, our feelings, this conversation, it will never occur again in exactly the same way.
Okay, I could get that.
So imagine a specific summer evening from your childhood. Remember the smell of, say, cut grass and maybe barbecue smoke, the sound of crickets, maybe the laughter of a particular friend, the way the light fell in the backyard, that feeling of ease, of innocence,
Exactly.
that precise lived experience is primultimate, because even if you try to recreate it or if you encounter similar elements later in life, you will be older, the context will be different, your mood, everything. The original experience is gone, fixed in its pastness, unique and unrepeatable.
Right.
Nostalgia, then, is that deep recognition of primultimacy. We're yearning for something that is, by its very nature, unrepeatable and therefore uniquely precious in retrospect.
It's the unrepeatability that makes it special.
Exactly. It's what allows the look back to transfigure everything, making even the mundane seem extraordinary, precisely because of its unrepeatable quality. The past, viewed through that lens of nostalgia, becomes almost mythical because its return is, by definition, impossible.
This exploration of nostalgia clearly goes way beyond just a feeling. It seems deeply tangled up with our very sense of self, our identity. How does having a past, or this prime ultimacy of experience, connect to personal identity?
Fundamentally, having a past primarily means to inhabit a familiar world. Our memory plays a crucial role, obviously. It allows individual experiences to become part of our existential vocabulary, shaping who we are, how we make sense of the world. Things happen to us, they affect us, they lay down these grooves of understanding.
Right, we learn from experience.
We do, but there's a subtle interplay here. While memory is essential for acquiring new elements of the world, making them part of us, it's actually memory's other forgetting that is the catalyst for the becoming property of this element.
Forgetting helps us own it. How does that work?
Think about something that becomes deeply ingrained, totally habitual, like riding a bike or speaking your native language, or even just navigating your own home in the dark. You no longer consciously remember how to do it step by step each time, the way you recall a specific event.
The automatic.
Exactly. It becomes part of your impersonal way of being in the world. You just are a person who does these things. And this familiarity isn't about recognizing a separate object again, like, oh, I remember that cup. Instead, it's a quality implicit in the how of my interactions with this object.
It's in the doing.
Right. The past isn't just behind us. It's built right into the present in the form of these ingrained habits, reflexes, intuitions. It's the very substance of how we engage with the world right now.
That's a powerful way to think about it. And the past as an active, almost invisible part of our present, woven into us through habit. But then, how does this personal past, this identity, become something we can consciously relate to, something proprietary, something we can say, this is my past, my identity?
That's where the presence of the look of the other becomes absolutely crucial.
Your look of the other, you mean how other people see us?
Precisely. Nostalgia, in a way, bears witness to my having been. It reminds us that I, the nostalgic subject, myself, am part of this past. Now, to apprehend myself as seen is, in fact, to apprehend myself as seen in the world.
Okay.
Through the other's gaze, we become alienated, but in a very specific and surprisingly positive sense. We recognize ourselves as an object in the world, viewed by another, no longer just a pure, unobserved consciousness floating around.
So seeing ourselves as others see us.
Yes, and this alienation isn't necessarily negative. It actually allows us to acquire a different kind of subjectivity.
Objectivated subjectivity.
Objectivated subjectivity. Okay, that's a dense phrase. Can you break that down for us? What does it mean for our everyday experience of identity?
Okay, think of it like this. Imagine you're at a party, right? And someone starts telling a funny story about something you did last year.
As they tell it, describing your actions, your reactions, maybe exaggerating a bit, you suddenly see yourself from the outside, almost like you're a character in their story.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Cringy sometimes.
Maybe. But that's a taste of objectivated subjectivity. You're seeing yourself as an object in the world, through another's eyes, not just living inside your own head. And this external recognition, the seeing ourselves as seen, is how we build a consistent self that exists not just in our own minds, but in the shared social world.
So it's not just internal memory.
No, our personal identity isn't just about psychological continuity, our own stream of consciousness or memories. It's fundamentally an intersubjective practice of attribution that assigns responsibility for a past action to me.
Others assigning things to us.
Yeah. Being the person who is basically short for being recognized by others to be the person. When others attribute an action to you, oh, that's the person who climbed that statue or whatever it is, it's like a tiny deposit into your being account.
Accumulating being.
In a sense, yeah. You're accumulating substance, becoming more solid as a person in the world, not just a fleeting set of experiences. Responsibility and agency become these ontological prisms that allow us to accumulate being, to build up a coherent, attributable self over time, recognized by others.
I see. So it's not enough to just remember your past. For it to become truly your identity, others have to recognize it and attribute it back to you. That's a fascinating twist.
It is, isn't it?
Let's loop back then to our original example, the Swiss soldier from the historical section. How does this idea of the look of the other and having a proprietary past apply to his intense homesickness, the thing they called a disease?
Well, the Swiss soldier is described as being cut off from his own past, experiencing it as truly past in a particularly sharp, painful way.
Why?
Precisely because he lacks the distinct possibilities by virtue of this past in his new environment. In a foreign land among strangers, he doesn't have the context, or critically, the other, the community, to recognize his accustomed activities, his habits, his way of being, and therefore his sense of self.
Nobody gets him?
Basically, yeah. His daily habits, his cultural cues, his very way of being are no longer mirrored or validated by those around him. The stranger, the new environment, does not recognize their environment as familiar in the same way. And crucially, the soldier lacks the quality of having a particular past that is recognized and affirmed by others in that context.
The social mirror is missing.
Exactly. The familiarity of our world and our very identity depends on the continuity of our activity being recognizable by another. Without that recognition, our past risks becoming just a collection of disconnected facts, rather than a lived, proprietary history that shapes our present identity. His sense of who he is starts to unravel.
This connects so well to Kierkegaard's portrayal of the aesthetic individual in Either Or. He describes them as living a masquerade, a non-entity where every disclosure is always a deception. What does this aesthetic individual reveal about how we relate to our past, or maybe how we fail to relate to it?
Kierkegaard's aesthete is a brilliant example of a profound mode of inauthentic being. It's a way of living that consciously avoids commitment. And by extension, avoids building a coherent, cumulative past. They are masters of the moment, seeking novelty, pleasure, but refusing to let any experience truly stick or become foundational.
They don't let it define them.
Precisely. Their actions have subjective inconsequentiality because they actively choose not to give their past any practical weight or consequence. Their recurring refrain, Kierkegaard says, is, "What does it matter to me what I said yesterday?" Very. They might try on different personas, different beliefs, different relationships, but they never truly inhabit them. It's all performance, a masquerade. They evade commitment, and so their actions don't build into a coherent, responsible self.
Unlike the authentic individual.
Exactly. The authentic individual for Kierkegaard is someone for whom past actions do lead to commitments and shape future choices. For the inauthentic individual, recollection, looking back, just becomes another self-indulgent possibility of the past. It represents disconnected and non-cumulative experiences.
Just episodes.
Just episodes, yeah. Easily discarded. Their past doesn't matter to them in a way that builds identity. It's just a series of moments. Think of it like constantly changing outfits but never finding your own style, or maybe perpetually dabbling in hobbies without ever mastering any.
Okay, so if the aesthete represents an inauthentic way of relating to the past, like constant emotional job hopping, what does an authentic historical time actually look like? How does a truly authentic person integrate their past into their present?
Well, for Kierkegaard, and this echoes in our sources, authentic historical time allows one to live in eternity and yet to hear the cabinet clock strike.
Okay, that's another evocative phrase. What does that mean?
It means the authentic individual isn't just trapped in a linear past, present, future march where the past just disappears. For them, eternity does not come afterward, but he has had eternity in time, has preserved eternity in time.
Preserved eternity in time.
What this powerful idea suggests is that time, rather than threatening to destroy our efforts or make our past irrelevant, actually consummates them. Our past actions, choices, experiences, they don't just vanish. They are preserved, transformed, and they continue to resonate and accumulate meaning in the present.
So it's about building on what came before.
Exactly. It means continuing one's past and giving it novel meaning through responsible, committed action in the present.
And the opposite.
Conversely, when one fails to take responsibility for their past, when they live like Kierkegaard's aesthete, their life becomes a constant beginning, a succession of agonizing instants that clings to nothing and urges to nothing.
No direction.
No trajectory, no growth, just a disjointed series of present moments, always starting over. Such an individual is delivered over to the time of the they, an impersonal, disconnected temporality. Think of someone constantly chasing the next trend or perpetually restarting their life after every minor setback, never really learning from or building upon what came before.
The past becomes just a discarded costume.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
This sounds very connected to broader societal shifts, particularly modernity. I'm thinking about this concept of social acceleration and Überholung, self-overtaking, described as a central duty of the post-industrial individual.
Yes, absolutely.
It sounds like this constant push for reinvention might have a hidden cost.
It absolutely does, and this is a really critical point in our philosophical sources. In modern post-industrial societies, there's immense pressure, right, to be flexible, adaptable, have an unending ability to reinvent ourselves.
Pivot, upskill, never stand still.
Exactly, all that buzz. And while on the surface it seems liberating, maybe even empowering, our sources argue it can paradoxically lead to the disappearance of the individual.
How so? Disappearance.
It creates a subject who feels alienated from this identity, which he can only recuperate in the form of the identity of a particular individual, meaning they can only grasp their identity as a specific, discrete self that is constantly being remade, rather than as a continuous, evolving being with roots.
Ah, I see. A series of snapshots, not a film.
That's a great analogy. And there's a strong claim here. Nostalgia is the inescapable fate of the sovereign individual.
An inescapable fate. That's it.
Okay.
What do they mean by the sovereign individual, and why would nostalgia be their unavoidable destiny?
The sovereign individual in this context is the modern person who often implicitly believes they are entirely self-created, self-sufficient, unbound by tradition or deep collective identity. Their identity isn't a given inheritance, it's given as a task.
Something you have to constantly work on.
Right. It's experienced as a lack that must be constantly filled or constructed. And this creates an existential errancy and ontological nomadicism in the intersubjectively constituted world.
Existential errancy.
Yeah.
Ontological nomadicism. Sounds like being permanently restless.
Pretty much. An inability to fully settle into one's being because identity is always a project rather than a stable foundation. And this is very similar, the sources argue, to the displaced individual's awareness of an unfamiliar here and a longed-for elsewhere.
Like the Swiss mercenary again.
Exactly. Just as the mercenary longed for a physical home, the sovereign individual, constantly reinventing themselves, longs for a stable, integrated past that provides a sense of rootedness and continuity, even if that past is partly imagined.
So the constant change makes you yearn for stability.
It suggests that the loss of the ability to appropriate its past predisposes the empirical subject to an almost inescapable nostalgia. When your identity is this fluid, constantly evolving task, the fixed, knowable past becomes an anchor you instinctively yearn for, even if that anchor is an idealized construction.
Okay, so if identity is this constant task and we're always in motion, how do we even make sense of our lives? It feels like narrative storytelling must play a crucial role here, right, in providing that coherence.
It absolutely does. It's central. The core argument we found is that the unity of a human life is the unity of a narrative quest.
A narrative quest.
Yeah. For an authentic individual, their life lends itself to a narrative representation. It possesses an internal unity. They can tell a coherent story about who they are, where they've come from, where they think they're going.
And if you can't tell that story,
then the incapacity of narrative synthesis isn't just a symptom of an identity crisis, it is the identity crisis. If you can't weave your experiences into a coherent story, you struggle to understand who you are. Narrative, in its deepest sense, confers eo ipso, inherently, by that very act, coherence on our time.
it gives shape to the chaos.
Exactly. It transforms a potentially chaotic jumble of moments into a meaningful sequence, a journey. And narrative, as the sources explain, has these two key dimensions. There's the chronological one, events happening in sequence, A, then B, then C.
Right, it's at the timeline.
But there's also a non-chronological one, which is about the plot, the pattern, the underlying unity of the story. And the fascinating part is that the end of a narrative is always already prefigured in the beginning.
Like foreshadowing.
Kind of, yeah. It's not just a random series of events. It's a coherent journey where events build towards a meaningful conclusion. Think of a novel, the ending might surprise you, but once you know it, you can often look back and see how earlier events pointed towards it, how themes developed.
Right.
And in auto-narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about our own lives, the narrating self, the person telling this story now, determines what this past is, not the other way around.
So we shape our past by how we tell its story.
In a very real sense, yes. It's not about perfectly recreating some objective past as it really was. It's about discerning the unifying development that culminates in the present moment. And this act of giving an account of myself is an action, not merely a reflective exercise.
Telling the story is doing something.
Yes, narrative is required for the attribution of actions, claiming things as my actions, and for my becoming agent. It's how we become the authors, or at least the primary interpreters, of our own identity.
Wow. This has been such a profound deep dive into the philosophical and historical roots, really getting under the skin of nostalgia. But let's bring it back maybe to a more common psychological understanding. Rosy retrospection.
Ah, yes. The tendency to remember things better than they were.
Right. The idea that we remember past events as more positive than they actually felt at the time. How does this psychological phenomenon fit into the bigger picture we've been painting?
Well, rosy retrospection is definitely a well-documented thing in psychology. You have researchers in memory studies, names like Elizabeth Loftus, Daniel Schachter, Endel Tolving come up who have extensively shown memory's fallibility.
Memory isn't perfect.
Far from it. And patient examples like HMKC, Clive Waring, people with severe memory impairments also teach us a lot about how memory works or doesn't work. The key takeaway is that our memories aren't like perfect, fixed video recording.
You change.
They're dynamic, often reconstructed each time we recall them. And that reconstruction can be influenced by all sorts of things. Our current mood, our desire for a coherent story, even new information we've learned since.
Okay.
And psychologist Ethan Kross suggests that the act of thinking about the past is one way we can actually gain distance from your experiences.
Distance helps.
It can. When we look back on tough times and remember them maybe a bit more positively, it can be a tool for emotional regulation. It helps us cope by reframing difficult experiences in a more manageable light, even if that involves a bit of, idealization.
Mental self-soothing?
Exactly. It's a form of mental self-soothing.
So there can be some genuine pros, then, to romanticizing the past, beyond just feeling good in the moment. What do our sources highlight as practical benefits?
Well, one key benefit, maybe surprisingly, is simply fun and relaxation.
Just enjoying the daydream.
Pretty much. As one source puts it, escapism can be beneficial at offering you the space and breathing room you need whenever the pressures of life get too much. Sometimes, yeah, a little mental vacation to an idealized past can provide genuine relief, a chance to recharge before you have to face the present again.
Okay, that makes sense.
What else? Another significant pro is its power to drive interest in history and learning.
How does that work?
Think of historical sites like Sovereign Hill in Victoria, Australia, that gold rush-themed tourist place. Its marketing highlights things like lamplight tours and photos of happy kids in costume. It talks about experiences like travel under night skies to explore space, delve into the dream time, and relive the drama of Australia's most important rebellion.
Sounds exciting.
It does. But what the marketing tends to subtly, or maybe not so subtly, omit are the less appealing historical realities. Things like the pervasive child labor and mine site injuries, or, horrendously racist quotations from the actual period.
Ah, so it's a curated, more palatable version of history.
Exactly. It makes us want to engage with it, even if it's not the full, messy truth. And we see similar romanticization around figures like bushrangers,
Ned Kelly,
Mad Dog Morgan. They're often presented in popular culture as these national heroes or rebellious Robin Hood-type figures.
like anti-heroes.
Even though their actual methods often included robbery, hijacking, assault, kidnapping, and murder. Pretty grim stuff. But their violent actions are almost forgiven by a vast number of the public today because of this romanticized framing. They become folklore.
Interesting.
So it shows how romanticizing the past, while maybe not historically accurate, can serve this powerful purpose in shaping cultural narratives, fostering a sense of shared identity, and driving public engagement with historical themes. It simplifies complex figures into these easily digestible, sometimes thrilling archetypes.
Of course, there's always the flip side. What are some of the practical cons of romanticizing the past? The downsides that can genuinely harm us or hold us back?
Well, the practical cons are pretty clear. And yeah, they can be quite damaging. One example cited is that pervasive starving artist stereotype.
Ah, the suffering creative genius.
Right. Romanticizing mental illness or poverty or struggle in artists is really problematic. It fundamentally diminishes the work itself, ignoring the immense talent and skill involved. It kind of suggests that suffering is a requirement for creativity.
Which isn't true.
Not only is it not true, it can be actively harmful. As one artist put it, a person's illness is not synonymous with their talent. In fact, it can hinder it. This glorification can lead to this dangerous cycle where struggling artists might feel pressure to maintain their suffering or neglect their mental health just to seem authentic.
That's really damaging.
It is. And then circling back to that Reddit thread, we have that very direct, concise advice again. Stop cheating on the present with the past.
Back to that.
Yeah. It highlights that excessive romanticization, going too far down that path, can prevent us from engaging fully with our current lives, from addressing present challenges, and from actually building a meaningful future. It can become a form of paralysis where the idealized past is like a comfortable cage you don't want to leave.
But then our deepest sources, the philosophical ones, offer an even more nuanced argument for nostalgia, suggesting it's not always a weakness or defect, and maybe even has a critical role to play.
Precisely. This is where it gets really interesting. The philosopher Feuerhahn argues that the insistence of my place, i.e., my firm placement in the world, involves an ineradicable recklessness.
Okay, ineradicable recklessness. What does he mean?
What he means is that the very act of asserting our identity, of claiming our space, our history, our narrative, can sometimes be an unconscious act of exclusion or even a kind of dominance.
How so?
He suggests that having a unified history, that coherent, seamless narrative of self we were just talking about, is often a privilege acquired potentially at someone else's expense.
A privilege.
Yeah. It often requires a life that has not been disrupted by the arbitrary will of another, a life relatively free from external coercion. This raises a really profound ethical question about whose stories get to be told as smooth, unified narratives, and whose pasts are considered fragmented or disrupted, and why.
So the very act of building my own coherent identity might involve overlooking things, or even, as another philosopher, Levinas, suggests, a kind of usurpation that's provocative. Can you explain what Levinas means by usurpation for us?
It is provocative, absolutely. Levinas, a truly phenomenal thinker, asks this question. Is not my place in being, the da of my Dasein, already a usurpation, already a violence in respect to the other?
Okay, break down da of my Dasein.
Right. Die Reinen is a German philosophical term famously used by Heidegger, roughly meaning being there, or human existence, our presence in the world. So Levinas is asking, isn't the very fact of my existence, my taking up space here, my asserting my story, isn't that inherently a kind of usurpation, maybe even a subtle violence against the other person, the other existence?
How could just existing be violence?
Think about it. If you claim a certain history or identity or even physical space for yourself, you might inadvertently be overshadowing, dismissing, or even actively displacing the history, identity, or space of someone else. For instance, historically, claiming a piece of land as yours often involved displacing indigenous populations.
Right, okay.
Or even in a more personal sense, maybe a family narrative that emphasizes one person's achievements might implicitly diminish another family member's struggles or contributions. It's not necessarily about intentional malice, but about the inherent power dynamics involved in simply asserting, I am here, this is my story.
Wow, okay. So if that's the case...
If this argument holds water, then Feuerhahn concludes that the ability to feel nostalgia and to bear nostalgia would be more important than the ability to render oneself immune to it.
Feeling it is better than ignoring it.
In this view, yes. Such a nostalgia, one that acknowledges the loss and maybe the usurpation inherent in having a place, would be anything but self-indulgent. It would be a form of deep ethical awareness. This profound view reframes nostalgia completely. It becomes a kind of sightfulness rather than blindness.
Seeing more, not less.
Exactly. The nostalgic, in this deeper sense, does not see the present as a cumulative plenitude, not as some perfect, complete, seamless whole, but as populated with spectral remains of times that have irreversibly receded into the past.
Seeing the ghosts.
Seeing the ghosts, yeah. It's an Unheimlichkeit.
Unheimlichkeit. Uncanny. Unhomely.
Both, really. A powerful German term meaning unhomeliness or uncanniness. And this feeling adds a slightly wistful tinge, a hue of sepia to a world that we can only ever inhabit against the backdrop of an imaginary elsewhere.
An imaginary elsewhere.
And this elsewhere isn't just another place or time in a simple way. It's fundamentally the experience of a different kind of space. One that acknowledges loss, acknowledges the ghosts of what's gone, and understands the inherent instability, the partialness, maybe even the ethical compromises of our own place in the world.
It's an awareness of what's missing, what was sacrificed.
Exactly, rather than a denial. This form of nostalgia allows us to see the cracks in our own neat narratives, to acknowledge the complexities and the inherent losses that come with time and identity.
Wow. We've really gone on an incredible journey today, through the origins, the very nature, and these deep philosophical implications of nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's so clear now that it's far, far more than just a fleeting sentimental feeling or, a casual memory.
Definitely not.
The really profound aspect of modern identity and our complex relationship with time itself.
Absolutely. We've tracked it from being seen as this strange medical diagnosis specific to Swiss soldiers to understanding it as this complex interplay of memory and imagination, and ultimately revealing it as potentially an inescapable fate for the modern sovereign individual.
And maybe even, as you just described, a form of sightfulness.
Yeah, a sightfulness that acknowledges loss, maybe even acknowledges the costs of having a unified self rather than simply denying them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a thought to leave you with. If nostalgia is indeed perhaps an inherent condition of modern individual identity, a constant reminder of time's irreversible passage and the fundamental losses that shape us, how might embracing its wistful tinge, that sense of Unheimlichkeit, actually change our engagement with the present and our striving for a coherent self?
Hmm, that's the question.
Perhaps the wisdom lies not in desperately trying to avoid nostalgia or pathologize it, but in understanding what it truly tells us about who we are, about the complex, often melancholic beauty of the world we inhabit. What will you do with that thought?